The Prime Minister says he's concerned by suggestions that China has paused iron ore shipments from mining giant BHP. There are contradictory reports swirling about whether China has imposed the temporary ban. But Anthony Albanese says he wants the issue resolved quickly. Our Foreign Affairs reporter Stephen Dziedzic joins us now. Stephen, what do we know about this reported ban? And, is it clear exactly what's going on here?
No, to be honest, Gemma, it's simply not clear exactly what's going on. This was first reported by Bloomberg last night. They said, citing sources in China, that China's steel buyer, or rather its iron ore bulk buyer, had made a decision to effectively pause all shipments of iron ore from BHP in the midst of hardball negotiations over the price. The broader context here is that China's created this state-owned entity to try and drive down, or at least control the price of iron ore and to give it more leverage in negotiations with the big miners like BHP. So that was the initial report last night. It was contradicted by a commodity analytical firm in China later in the day, saying that they'd been in touch with the state buyer and the state buyer had denied any sort of move to ban iron ore shipments from BHP. So that the picture is simply not clear. But of course, this is of enormous consequence for Australia because BHP is our largest shipper of iron ore to China, and iron ore is our largest commodity inflow from into China. In other words, Australia's prosperity and our budget bottom line leans very heavily on iron ore, and it leans quite heavily on BHP's shipments to China. So any suggestion that there might be even a temporary pause is something that's going to cause quite a bit of concern in Canberra.
Stephen, what has the Prime Minister had to say about this?
Yeah, it was interesting. The Prime Minister was asked about this report and waded right in, something that perhaps we might not have expected him to do, given it's between two commercial entities. But he clearly wanted to send a message here. Anthony Albanese said he'd seen the reports, he was concerned by them. He also suggested that he wanted it to be resolved quickly, suggesting in his answer that this might perhaps be a negotiating tactic that China was using in order to give itself more leverage over BHP and potentially to drive down the price. Either way, the Prime Minister said he wanted this resolved quickly. He didn't want it to drag. Let's take a listen to what he had to say.
I am concerned about that, and what we want to make sure is that markets operate properly. And of course, we have seen those issues in the past. I want to see Australian iron ore be able to be exported into China without hindrance. That is important. It makes a major contribution to China's economy, but also to Australia's. These measures are always disappointing, but let's hope, certainly, that they are very much short-term. Sometimes when people are negotiating over price, sometimes these things will occur, but I want to see this resolved quickly.
Stephen, what impact has this had on BHP's share price, and what happens next?
Look, the share price has dipped, but it's only dipped modestly, so you don't get a sense of crisis around the company or anything like that. Now, that may be because, people who are watching this closely are making a similar bet that this is a bit of a bluff by China. That's assuming that it has in fact happened. But as the Prime Minister was hinting at there on the point of leverage, some analysts are basically saying, look, there's simply no ready replacement for these shipments of high-quality iron ore. China might be able to find a substitute from other Australian and international shippers in the short term, but before too long they're going to have to turn back to BHP in order to meet the demand that it's got, even with its moves to contract steel supply and steel production. And so that might be informing this relatively modest move on the share market. People who watch these things closely might be betting that in the end China is likely to fold. But as I said, this is something that's going to be watched very closely in Canberra, given the stakes and the amounts of money at play.